Snowpiercer may seem like a straightforward critique on class division, but I think it's asking more difficult questions like what happens after a revolution, and how glorious is it? We're talking about that and more this week in Kaden's Movie Club. Now, I want to be really clear, I don't think Snowpiercer suggests that we shouldn't try to change society or that revolutions shouldn't happen, but I do think it asks tough questions about the difficulty of something like class warfare and what a revolution really means. At the beginning of the movie, the remnants of humanity are all living aboard a massive train called the Snowpiercer. They can't leave the train because Earth is experiencing another ice age. But a man named Wilford, who just really loves trains,
from a very young age, Mr. Wilford's love of locomotives was apparent.
When I grow up, I will on a train forever.
Created a train that would be an arc for humanity to live on. And yeah, it's really outlandish. It's goofy and fun, which is why it's also impressive that the more serious themes the movie presents still work. That's part of the unique style of director Bong Joon-ho. He's able to merge crazy ideas, dark humor, and deep themes in a really unique way. The people at the back of the train, who are overcrowded, live in the dark, and are only given these gelatin protein bars to eat, which we later learn is made of cockroaches. The people at the front have nice clothes, all kinds of food, nightclubs, pools, you name it. The front section also takes people from the back by force. For instance, we see a violinist separated from his wife so he can be brought to the front to perform for them. We also see the front come and take children for reasons unknown. The tail sectioners are repeatedly told, mostly by Mason, who represents the front section, that their place in society is meant to be. Some people are lucky enough to be in a better position than them, but everything has its proper place, and they just need to accept that. The movie doesn't take long before it launches into a depiction of outright class warfare. Our protagonist, Curtis, becomes a reluctant leader of the revolution. And this isn't the first time people in the tail section have tried this. They've revolted multiple times in the last 18 years they've been on the train. All of those revolts were put down with brutal force. But Curtis realizes that with each revolt, the security forces had to expend resources. So he bets his life on the idea that the security is just for show and has no ammunition. Turns out he's right, and the tail section starts surging toward the front. Curtis's group meets resistance again and again, and the movie does something really interesting here. The first scene is violent and chaotic, but there's heroic energy to it. When Curtis is correct about the ammunition, when the group works together to stop the gates from closing, and when this ninja guy takes out a big guard. It's really exciting and even fun, like how the idea of a revolution is really appealing at the beginning. For some people, social warfare is like a kind of fantasy, and this is how they picture it, sticking it to the man and the power of the people overtaking oppressive forces. But several cars later, the tone starts to shift when the revolt takes heavy losses against a stronger opposing force. There's an extended, brutal fight here with lots of casualties. The cinematography, the editing, the music, it's all stylistically changed from what we saw earlier. This fight used to seem exciting, but now it's become something that feels more like desperation. At one point, Curtis has to make a decision between saving his friend and capturing one of the enemy leaders, Mason. And he chooses Mason, leaving his friend to die. With this tone and style shift, the story starts to show us the true nature of this conflict. It's brutal and violent, and people will be lost. We also learn a lot about Curtis. Maybe it was a selfish action and he cares more about vengeance than his friends, or maybe it was more of a noble and necessary choice, that the cause is more important than one person. Either way, we know that Curtis is willing to sacrifice others to achieve his goal. And as Curtis continues to lead the revolution forward, the violent nature of this war becomes more and more apparent as characters we've come to know start dropping like flies. And these character deaths aren't really noble or overly dramatic. They're matter of fact, a harsh reality of this conflict. By the time Curtis reaches the end of the train and the final door before reaching Wilford himself, the only people left are Namgung and Yona. Namgung reveals that his plan is to open a different door, the one that will allow him to exit the train. He wants to abandon the class system altogether. Curtis reveals that when people first boarded the train, there was no food or water at the back, and things were so desperate people resorted to cannibalism. To prevent innocent people from being attacked, people were offering one of their arms to ensure that they didn't fall into complete chaos, but Curtis didn't have the courage to do it. The story clarifies an earlier line from Curtis, "How can I lead if I have two good arms?" And this idea of sacrifice becomes really important when Curtis comes face to face with Wilford, who confesses that every revolt has actually been incited deliberately to keep the train's population in check, a sacrifice to maintain society. And then he offers his position to Curtis. Wilford sees Curtis as the obvious choice to be his successor, since Curtis has been willing to sacrifice others, but not himself. And Wilford bets that the allure of being the one in power will be too much for Curtis. It's truly unclear what Curtis will do until Yona finds one of the missing children under the floor. Parts of the train's engine have broken and the parts are extinct, and the kids are small enough to keep the train running manually which is why Wilfred has taken kids from the back of the train. This is the last straw for Curtis, who finally understands that if he doesn't make a sacrifice now, the younger generation will be the ones to pay the price. So he sacrifices a limb to rescue the child. He then provides a match for Namgoon to blow open the train, which effectively is choosing to dismantle the entire system. The visuals might seem like a cool action movie train crash, but in the context of our story, it's anything but that. A whole society has just been destroyed. Nearly everyone aboard this train has just been sacrificed in order for the class system to be fully undone. And this goes back to the difficult nature of class warfare and revolutions that I believe the story is trying to draw attention to. In the beginning, we might be viewing such things with rose-tinted glasses, but the truth is, it takes real sacrifice to upend a system that's so embedded in society's structure. And I think it leaves the question to the viewer about whether the ends justify the means with the ending. Yona and Tim are the only survivors to make it off the train, which is now the ruins of civilization. They're essentially starting anew, like a primitive form of human beings. And the final shot is of a polar bear. This can also be interpreted multiple ways. One, as a sign of hope. Life exists outside the train. Yona and Tim can survive outside of the class system. Or two, a sign of despair. Polar bears are predators. The class system has been destroyed, but the survivors now face a world ruled by nature, and it may be no less brutal. And if we look back on our entire month of movies with the post-apocalyptic theme, do we see a similar trend of ambiguity? One thing I've been saying through the month is that these movies often use the post-apocalyptic setting, a depiction of humanity's downfall, to draw attention to humanity's current problems. Several movie club members were quick to point this out, and I'm paraphrasing their comments, but Augie said about WALL-E, "I remember the buzz around this movie when it came out. How easy it is to forget and look away from the damage we cause when it doesn't fit conveniently into our lives." Ryan said about Train to Busan, "I think the train itself becomes a microcosm of society, where privilege can buy temporary safety but ultimately fails to guarantee survival." Post-apocalyptic movies are also inherently sci-fi, and let's say it together, sci-fi asks questions. What happens to us when we lose hope for the future? What happens when we see each other as monsters? What happens when we become complacent about the problems we face? What happens when we allow power structures to put each other into categories of worth? And what happens when we dismantle those structures by force? But do any of these movies provide answers on how to combat these problems? That's left up to the viewer's interpretation. I think they suggest things, but what was most interesting to me is that most of them ended on something hopeful that still remained ambiguous. Children of Men ended just as Theo passed away, but a ship was approaching Key. We don't know exactly what happens to her, but we're left with the implications that things can get better. In I Am Legend's true ending, as we talked about, Neville leaves New York City to find a colony of humans with Anna. There's no promise that the colony actually exists, but they decide to trust in the hope that there is. In WALL-E, humans override the technology that has made them complacent and return back to Earth. It's still a trash heap, but we see the beginnings of something better. In Train to Busan, the daughter sings a hopeful song in honor of her father's sacrifice, which allows the soldiers to recognize them as human. In Snowpiercer, Yona and Tim face the opportunity to build a better world than the one they came from. So while the setting of post-apocalyptic movies may seem really grim, to consider the end of civilization as we know it, the purpose of these stories is usually to do the opposite. It's to analyze the problems that could lead to our downfall in the hope that doing so may lead us to change. And that's why I believe these stories so often end on a hopeful note despite the chaos that comes before. I think some really great conversations could be had about this and the nature of post-apocalyptic stories, so let me know what you think about the genre and how the movies we watched play into that. But for now, that concludes our June movie club. I'll be announcing the movie lineup and theme for July tomorrow, so stay tuned.